Brendan O'Connor, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Look, the so-called effective unemployment rate came down in October from 9.3 to 7.4%. Now, a lot of this is due to Victoria reopening, clearly. There is a long way to go, but are you confident we are now in an economic recovery?
Well, there's been some signs of recovery, and I think in large part that's due to the efforts by the state and territory leaders keeping control of the pandemic. Now, the federal government have every right to say they've done some things right, but they have done some things wrong as well. And they forgot, for example, in the first instance, to even have a wage subsidy, and I'm glad to say that they changed their mind on that. But I think it's fair to say, David, that the state premiers and chief ministers of the territories, in keeping control of the pandemic, have allowed the economy to open up. Now, that's despite the fact that federal ministers, including the federal treasurer, have been relentless in their attacks on, in particular, the Victorian Premier at a time when we needed to deal with that first challenge, the health challenge.
You refer to JobKeeper. It clearly has been important through all of this. JobSeeker as well. Labor has argued they should be at higher rates. What do you think the rate should be for JobKeeper and JobSeeker right now?
Well, firstly, JobKeeper was critical to save businesses and to support jobs. And we do believe that they're cutting it too early. I mean, this is the first recession we've had in 30 years, and the government is abolishing JobKeeper in March and have been reducing it since September, and that makes it hard for recovering businesses.
So what should it be?
So I think it should have remained as it was for longer. It is a temporary measure, but in the depths of a recession, we don't want to make that recession deeper and longer than it need be, and that needs, therefore, a proper response. And frankly, whatever faults the JobKeeper has, it is the best form of support for businesses and for workers.
So you think it should still be at $1,500 a fortnight?
I think they certainly could have looked at issues about overpayments for part-time workers and maybe allowed for those that were excluded from JobKeeper to be actually covered, because that would also cover the businesses that employ casuals who may have been employed for less than 12 months. But that full-time rate,
you think it should still be $1,500?
I think maintaining the scheme as it was, looking at the overpayments that I think were unnecessary. I think it was a $6 billion spend on paying people beyond their income was unnecessary. They could have looked at that and then included some of the people that missed out. But the reason I say, and the reason Labor says it should be maintained, is that the new scheme will not help recovering businesses.
Can I turn to the situation in South Australia? They're coming out of a tight lockdown this morning. Police now say a man on a temporary graduate visa lied about the fact he was working in a pizza shop in Adelaide when he contracted the virus, which prompted the hard lockdown earlier in the week to be put in place. What do you think the lessons of this fairly strange set of circumstances are?
Yeah, well, the first lesson is don't lie. And I think we had similar problems in Victoria. People didn't tell the truth, and it made it a lot harder for the health teams and the government to deal with such matters. So hopefully people will learn from that. Secondly, I think it shows that if you don't provide sufficient support, people are more likely to lie. Now, it is interesting that this worker may well have been on a temporary visa, because remember, they were excluded from not only JobKeeper, but JobSeeker. We've had hundreds of thousands of temporary visa applicants who don't have any support in a recession, where people, obviously employers won't choose to employ them necessarily if they're not going to get
So being denied JobKeeper may have encouraged him
and
to
JobSeeker, so they don't get any support, they get no social benefit and social welfare benefit, and they get no support, a subsidy.
So you're saying this might have encouraged him to take on jobs and lie about it?
Well, I think if you can't find any other form of income, you're going to go straight into poverty. And I'm just making the point that so you make decisions at the federal level, they can have consequences down the track. Now, we did say there should be some modest support for people on temporary visas, and you can't give them nothing, because they'll end up being in a difficult situation, as clearly is the case with respect to this particular individual.
The other issue here is the other individual, the one who was a security guard in hotel quarantine, who was also working legally at the pizza shop as well.
Yeah.
Do you think those working in hotel quarantine, security guards and others, should only be allowed to work in that job, not have secondary jobs?
I do, and I think that the lessons we should learn from first Sydney and then most significantly in Victoria and now in South Australia is that we should not have a situation where security guards for quarantine are in multiple workplaces. Now, there might be some cost to bear for that.
Yeah, how do you do this?
Well, I think the state might have to consider bearing some of that cost.
The state government.
State or federal government, a combination of governments, because to bear that cost is to save possibly billions. The fact that we would allow a system that would make us close the economy down could cost this economy billions of dollars, businesses hitting the wall, people being unemployed. Now, it seems to me it's better to spend $1 and save 100, and that's what should be happening here for public health reasons, most importantly, but also for economic reasons.
The Labor opposition in South Australia has gone further. They say hotel quarantine altogether should stop indefinitely. It's too dangerous. Do you agree?
Well, I'm not aware of the details, but I do think we do have to have a responsible and safe way of quarantining people in ports around Australia, not rely heavily on Sydney. We have to pay regard to New South Wales.
So you think we should continue with hotel quarantine?
I think it can be, provided it can be done in a safe way. And right now, you can't have a situation, I would contend, but given what we've seen, to have workers working in multiple places. I mean, but this is a fault line about insecure work. And it's about one of the reasons why we've got major problems, because our labour market is increasingly precarious, growing casualisation, and I guess the pandemic has exposed that problem.
Can I turn to superannuation? On Friday, the long-running review of retirement incomes was released. This is by the former Treasury official Mike Callaghan. It looks, amongst other things, at the compulsory super guarantee, which is 9.5%, scheduled to go up to 12% in 2025. The report finds keeping it at 9.5% would, quote, allow people to have higher incomes during their working life while still being able to maintain their living standards in retirement. Labor, though, doesn't buy that.
No.
Why not?
Well, firstly, we don't agree with the proposition that wages will flow onto workers if you forego the superannuation increase, because evidence shows that's not the case. And it's not that surprising that Scott Morrison's looking to walk away from an election commitment, a promise he made to the Australian people, because it was done by John Howard and Tony Abbott. They've never not found a reason to defer an increase to universal super. They've never supported it, a bit like Medicare historically. They loathed Medicare originally, they loathe universal super, and they find ways to get out of election commitments.
But this is a pretty well-respected former Treasury official who's done this extensive report. You've got the Reserve Bank Governor.
Pages, yeah.
Well, there are. The Reserve Bank Governor's also made a similar point about the trade-off between lifting that super contribution and wages. I mean, is there evidence to suggest that increasing the superannuation contribution from employers can still allow them to increase wages?
Well, firstly, we've got the lowest wage growth on record. So, the fact is, I wouldn't trust this government to be finding point to one policy that this government has that actually is making sure that wages grow. We have the lowest wage growth on record. We've got growing job insecurity. There's not one policy response by the government to those two major problems that confront Australian workers. So I wouldn't trust this government to be finding ways to increase wage growth, and all they've done is found an excuse not to pass on a super increase again, it would appear. Now, they haven't yet made that decision. I hope they don't. I hope they stick with their election promise, the commitment they made to the Australian people before the election. A
couple of quick ones. Finally, Anthony Albanese is going to make some minor changes to his front bench in a matter of weeks. Are you keen to stay where you are? Will you be going around again at the next election? Yeah,
look, firstly, that's the prerogative of the Labor leader to make decisions, and I love the portfolio. It's a remarkably interesting one, and I'm very happy to stay here, but that's entirely up to the Labor leader. I'm certainly looking forward to winning the next election and becoming a minister in an Albanese government.
And finally, it's been another rough week in terms of the Australia-China relationship. Do you think the government the Prime Minister could be doing anything differently?
Well, you need a bit of diplomatic deftness, I think, when you're engaging with major trading partners. And I'd have to say there's been certainly concerns about what has happened. We don't believe for a moment that we should resile from our values or from, human rights, and we should be very vociferous in defending our values. But you have to ensure there is respect between two countries, between our major trading partner in this case. It's not helped when you hear the offensive and gratuitous comments made by government members with respect to China. I do think Scott Morrison has to focus on this issue as a priority, because primary producers and many others are being very adversely affected, given the situation we find ourselves in with China. And so I'm hoping there's a bit of effort being undertaken behind the scenes at the very least.
Brendan O'Connor, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.